S. McEwen here, President and CEO of Predictable Success, and welcome back to the Predictable Success interview series, in which we talk to people who have either achieved predictable success in their own lives and careers or who are helping other people do the same. And today I'm delighted to be speaking with two people who really, you could only say that they have done that in such great detail for so many people, and particularly over the last year or so. Tony Hsieh, CEO of Zappos, and Jenn Limm, CEO of Delivering Happiness. Welcome, Tony and Jenn.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. What I'd like to do in the time that we have together is talk mostly about delivering happiness and how that evolved and what your intentions are. I know that you've had a recent move around of responsibilities to free you up, Jen, a little bit more to concentrate on that. And I'd like to talk mostly about that, but I'd like to start first of all, just for the 1.5 listeners that we have that don't know in intimate detail the story of you, Tony and Jenn and Zappos, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the background. And if I could start with you first, Tony. Of course, you're most famous for mounting an egregious campaign in June 2010 on behalf of your book that foisted my excellent book, Predictable Success, down to number 2 in Amazon, number 5 in the Wall Street Journal. But you've done a couple of other things as well as that. And those of us that are ancient in internet terms remember the great work that you did. Seems like a lifetime ago now with Link Exchange. But what I'd love to hear from you, Tony, is if you were to trace the arc of what's got you to what you're trying to achieve now with delivering happiness, if you were to think back about what evolved your thinking to what you're trying to deliver to the world now, what would be the 2 or 3 big milestones? What has most impacted you personally in wanting to share the concept of delivering happiness?
I guess for me, it was start with Link Exchange, and I've been pretty entrepreneurial most of my life, and so I've done everything from garage sales to pizza business, mail order business, and for Link Exchange, that was a company that was founded. My roommate from college and I co-founded in 1996, and we grew that to about 100 or so people, and then ended up selling it to Microsoft in 1998, 2.5 years later. And what a lot of people don't know is the real reason why we ended up selling it, and the real reason is because it just ended up not being a fun place to work at anymore, and the company culture went completely downhill. And that was largely our fault. We just didn't know any better to pay attention to company culture. And so with Zappos, from the beginning, culture has always been important. And with Link Exchange, financially got lucky with the timing, and so I was in the position of trying to figure out what is it that I want to do for myself that I would actually be happy with. And as I started getting involved with Zappos, just started thinking about it more from the perspective of like, who are the people I want to work with, and my answer was they're people that I would want to be around, even if we weren't forced to be in business together. And so that's really what I think led to the focus on culture and not wanting to repeat the same mistake again that I'd made at my previous company. And then as Zappo started growing, and as it turned out, coincidentally, that actually there's been research that has shown that companies with strong cultures actually perform better financially in the long run than their peers. And so whether that was sheer dumb luck or not, it's where we are today, that just happened to work out. And so now part of the reason for writing the book was really to spread this whole idea of happiness as a business model, making customers happy, making employees happy, to other companies and organizations and industries.
So when you started Zappos, in a sense, if I'm hearing you correctly, Tony, you're a little snake bit with the company morale culture issue from Link Exchange. Did you try to work out what you wanted in Zappos from first principles, or did you go and benchmark what other organizations and people were doing?
No, it was really more from just a selfish perspective, just what would I want for myself, and
right.
And then that kind of evolved into, as it turned out, that actually ended up being something that in the long run is good for business as well.
Right. Because obviously what's happening today is that a lot of people obviously hold Zappos and quite rightly in huge esteem for what you're doing there, and other organizations, obviously like Netflix. If you, as you are right now, talking to 2,000 or 3,000 CEOs of many of them young organizations, do you recommend that they go out and model best practices for corporate culture, or that they really try and work out what's right for them?
Well, I don't think I tend to not gravitate towards the phrase best practices, because a lot of that sounds very consulting-ish and so on. But I guess our message to people is not so much other companies should adopt the Zappos culture or Zappos values, but that companies should figure out what values are right for them and really commit to them and align the entire organization around them. And a lot of companies have these things called core values or guiding principles, but the problem is usually they're very lofty sounding, and they kind of read like a press release that the marketing department put out, and maybe you learn about it on day one of orientation, but then it just becomes this meaningless plaque on the lobby wall. And for us, we really encourage companies to come up with committable core values, and by committable, meaning they're willing to hire or fire people based on them independent of their actual job performance. And when you use that criteria, it's actually a really hard list to come up with. Like, what are you actually willing to hire and fire based on that has nothing to do with their actual job function? But when you actually are able to come up with that list that's right for your organization, it actually ends up being a really powerful thing, because it aligns the organization, and a lot of really good things come out of that.
Got it. And Jen, when did you come into the picture? You work with Tony at Link Exchange, or did you start with Zappos?
No, I actually started at Zappos probably, I think, about 7-8 years ago now.
Okay.
Basically, as I was a freelance consultant at that time, and I'm still, freelancing as for Zappos in different projects like the Culture Book and helping them move to Las Vegas from San Francisco and such.
So you used consultant speak phrases like best practices, did you?
Well, coming from that background, I was an internet consultant at KPMG, so unfortunately that was part of my dictionary, but I've since moved on from that.
So could you convey to me as best you can, Jen, what have you seen, what would you say is the biggest change that's happened in Zappos over that period of time? Has it been a question of arriving at something that was, this is what we all think, of course, as we watch the story, is that you will have arrived there at whatever time, and it was small and perfectly formed, and all you've done is make something that was wonderful bigger. Do you have particular challenges that came along with growth and maintaining the culture?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The way I look at Zappos, I always liken it to like the best friend's little brother growing up in high school, because I've known Tony for 11 years now, and when I first met him, Zappos was just starting, and so over the years, I've just seen it grow in ways that I didn't imagine, and all of a sudden, here we are, and I look at the younger brother that grew to someone that all hardly recognizable in ways that I'm really proud of. So there are always challenges along the way, and what I thought was most respectable of how Zappos was grown and built was that it always took risks. I mean, they were very calculated risks, but risks based on things that were most meaningful and not about, pure profit, but it was about watching the growth of a thought they could do things differently in a way that was true to more of the values. And core values came up not at the beginning of the company, but probably around 6-7 years ago, once right around the time the Culture Book was born. And it was never really, no one really tried doing these kind of things, but it just seemed to make sense from a business and a personal level. So I think by seeing those things, those risks taken, but it really panned out in the end, because everyone sort of thought that Zappos was an overnight success, but really it took many, many years of committing to those core values and committing to customer service and culture to get to the point where it is today. And I think that's what Tony largely talks about in his book, that it wasn't an overnight success. There was tons of risks and failures to get to the point where they are today, but it was always based on things that was most meaningful at the time.
Okay. And Tony, did you ever feel that there was a possibility that you were going to lose it, that the culture was getting away from you during that period of high growth?
During Zappos' high growth, you mean?
Yeah.
I think it was something that we always paid attention to, and especially during the first several years, both myself and Fred, who's been with Zappos as long as I have, we actually personally interviewed everyone for exactly that reason. Mm-hmm. And the core values actually originally came out as a way to really scale the culture, because then it got to the point where Fred and I couldn't interview everyone personally, and so we really were forced to figure out on paper, along with the rest of the company. It was a company-wide process to come up with our core values and really put on paper what we kind of a formalized definition of our culture.
Okay. I'd like to, just a last question before we move on to delivering happiness. I'd love to have you think forward, which I'm quite sure you have done. At the point when Zappos, when you are not around for whatever reason with Zappos, Tony, do you accept that at that point the culture should change, or is your view that the culture already is something that's independent of you, or do you not care, you won't be there? I mean, what's your view of how a culture should evolve once, I know you weren't technically just the single founder, but you're essentially seen in that way. What's your view about how a business should change once the founder is not there?
Well, I think the culture should always be evolving, and it is for us. And so for us, it's really, we expect our core values will always be the same, but how that manifests itself, I think, will definitely evolve over time. And I think culture in general is not built actually from the top down. I think it can be killed very easily from the top down, but it needs to happen organically and be driven from the bottom up. And so regardless of whether I'm still with the company 10 years from now or not, I think it's always going to be evolving. And really what's most important, I think, for a CEO and any CEO is to make sure you don't create an environment that will kind of kill that organic growth and evolution.
So 2 questions about delivering happiness. In a moment or two, Jenn, I'd just love to talk to you. I know you've moved into the role of CEO there, and ask you about your vision and what you'd love to see achieved in the next couple of years. But before we do that, just to segue in, Tony, did you plan that delivering happiness would become a movement, so to speak, when you were writing the book? Was your goal that it should be the foundation for this to happen, or have you been surprised that has happened? How did this look to you last year when you were launching the book?
Well, originally it was thought of more as just a book to help spread this idea to other companies, and so didn't necessarily think it would actually be a separate company in and of itself. And so the book was published, and then we went on a 3.5-month cross-country book tour in a bus. There were about 10 of us on the bus. And then I think it was really through that whole process that the thought came to really develop it into a real sustainable company. And Jenn can talk a bit more about that.
And Jenn, when did you move over into the CEO role?
I guess it would be towards the end of the bus tour, because it first, started as a book, as you know, and so we worked on that around 2009 Labor Day. A few weeks later, we turned it in, and then the whole pre-launch of the book started. And then once the book launched, it was mostly focused around the promotion and marketing efforts behind it. And then it was really interesting to see the reaction to it, knowing that it was mostly marketed as a business book. So it was sort of expected that we'd get such positive feedback from entrepreneurs and business owners, and then seeing how we rose on the New York Times list and bestsellers, that was all very gratifying. But what was unexpected was we got a lot of emails and personal stories from people outside of the business sector for example, from hospitals and students and families even saying that they want to apply these core values excuse me, and culture to what they're doing in their everyday lives. So that was really unforeseen and kind of took us by surprise in a good way. And so when we started doing the bus tour, that's what we had in mind. It was not just visiting with companies, which was part of it, and talking to entrepreneurs, but the other half of the tour was the time that we had on the road was dedicated to actually talking to the people that we heard from. So we visited schools and we visited hospitals and nonprofits to hear their feedback on what we believed as part of spreading our message. So through that process, like Tony said, we didn't really expect the company to be born out of it, but it just really grew organically in terms of the community that was tapping into this message. And as the book was translated into more languages, I think we're at 17 or so different languages and countries now, we've been getting more and more feedback from around the world, and that sort of really cemented what we were thinking was a universal chord being strummed. But then after hearing from all the global feedback, then we knew there was something out there that people, no matter where they're from, the country of origin, the culture, religious or non-religious, it was just this one idea of, yes, I can actually see how I can apply these frameworks of happiness or happiness as a business model to what I'm doing to my everyday life. So that's why the decision was made to take it from, first the book, then the bus tour, and now officially we're calling it the Delivering Happiness Movement, but essentially a company with a cause to support the movement.
Right. Did you, on a personal level, have to hesitate at all thinking about taking the role, or did you just think, oh, this is wonderful, I'll jump into it, or you miss the Zappo side of it? How has it impacted you personally?
Personally, it's been an amazing journey. I would have to say I've never worked more in my life from a day-to-day basis, but knowing that what we're doing from a greater goal and a higher purpose, it's, every moment is so meaningful. So I wake up in the morning and my one goal in life is to deliver happiness to the world. So I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing. But I still really have close ties with Zappos. I mean, I still will be producing a culture book, and there's a lot of ties within that. So as part of our venture into, bringing in sustainable revenue streams so we can support the company, delivering happiness, part of it will be helping companies and organizations create their own culture books. So really it's all pretty intertwined.
So what will success look like for you 3-4 years from now?
I always laugh at those questions because, we have our vision and we have what we want to do. But, if you asked me a year ago if I would be the CEO and Chief Happiness Officer of Delivering Happiness, I would have said, what are you talking about? So for me, I think as long as we stick to our purpose and our values as a company, I would be really happy to I think I would just be happy to see it grow towards that. And in a nutshell, for me, it's really growing the community and the connectedness of relationships between the community. So it's not the number of people that we have in it, but the number of meaningful interactions between the people that really believe in happiness as a framework for life.
Super. Will there be a second book? Will there be another book?
Yeah, we're actually talking about it right now. Tony and I were thinking about the next one. But in the interim, there was a comic book company called Roundtable, and they are developing comic books from business books. So we just are about to sign a contract with them to develop a comic book based on delivering happiness. And the idea there is that just because of all the feedback we got, there are different, segments that are really interested in this topic, whether it's, business readers that like it in the comic version, or kids in high school or college, or families. So we're just realizing that there's different ways that we can sort of massage the content in delivering happiness so that different audiences will be, better able to read and receive it.
Will you promise me that you won't launch it in January 2012?
That's exactly the date we're going to do, whenever you're coming out.
I want a straight run this time.
It's funny. Before I talk, I checked on Amazon on a bunch of books, and I saw that your book and Delivering Happiness is coupled. in their little package.
I take that as a great compliment. Tony, just in closing, as I said earlier, we're 2,000 to 3,000 CEOs likely to listen to this as it goes out and as a podcast. And I don't want to sound in any way naive or fawning about this, but the reality is that for most of us, the opportunity to talk to someone who's achieved what you have is absolutely literally a once in a lifetime experience. And what I'd love to have you share with our folks is, what's the biggest misunderstanding they may have as founder owners and CEOs about the difference between going out in the coalface every day the way they are and achieving the sort of huge mega success that you have? But, what do you find people misunderstand or assume that isn't right about what got you where you are?
I guess part of it, I would actually back up and ask them to really think about what their definition of success is, because I think a lot of people and we're kind of programmed by society, is just the definition of success is bigger numbers, or whether it's revenue or how much a company gets bought for, or so on. When really, if you actually break it down, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, what's kind of the point of doing all that? And if you keep asking yourself why over and over again about whatever you think your goal is in life, why is that your goal? And then whatever answer you give, ask yourself again why that is that. And then what I found is if you actually ask, and I'll ask other people why enough times, eventually almost everyone winds up with the same answer. And whatever their goal in life is, or the reason why they want more money or status or anything else, is because they believe that ultimately it will make them happier. Wow. And so, there's so many people in life that are not that happy doing their day-to-day, whatever their day-to-day activities are. And really, one of the messages from the book is to just try to frame what you're thinking in the context of that kind of ultimate goal of happiness. And that may change some of the decisions that you make about how you want to run your company or what you want to do. And for example, especially for founders, rather than focus on something that will make you a lot of money, instead, I encourage them to think about what you would be so passionate about doing that you'd be happy doing it for 10 years, even if you never made any money. And that's what you should actually be doing. And the irony in that is if you actually do that, it will actually greatly increase your chances of making more money, because your passion is what's going to get you through the tough times. And every business has its ups and downs, and that passion is going to rub off onto employees and then have this ripple effect on customers and your business partners and so on, which all greatly increase the chances of your company doing well financially. So I really encourage people to just make sure that they're doing stuff that makes them happy, that they're passionate about, rather than doing something in the name with money as your primary motivator.
Thank you, Tony. Great advice. Jenn, last word for you. If any of our folks that are listening are thinking, I really would like to get help bringing the delivering happiness mindset into my organization, how can they contact you? Or are you actively helping organizations now, or is that something for the future?
Yeah, well, we just announced the transition to the company at South by Southwest a few weeks ago, and one of that being, the consulting arm of it. And so we've already had several companies just from that weekend alone come to us and say, how can we start? So basically just send me an email. We're doing it pretty much from a pilot basis, and since we're just launching things out. But I would love to hear from anyone that's interested in doing what basically Zappos did in their organizations and in helping apply that to wherever they work. So my email is Jenn, Jenn, @deliveringhappiness.com.
And they can see more details at that URL, deliveringhappiness.com. Tony, Hsieh, Jenn Limm, thank you so very, very much for giving us your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.